5 seasons into the Talent Exodus Challenge, and we've made some great progress on our objectives, winning the Champions League at the end of Season 5 and qualifying for Europe 4 years in a row, which means all we need to do now is win the Premier League and call the challenge complete. Should be easy enough as reigning Champions League winners, right? Maybe not, because as usual, the Premier League seems harder to win than the Champions League, with us only finishing 4th last season, and as per the rules of the save, we have to sell our best 3 players from last season, including the man who single-handedly won us the Champions League, Stanis Idumbo Mazambo, and our starting striker, Karim Konate. We also already know we have to sell new signing Bradley Barcola at the end of the season, regardless of what happens, because he should be going this summer, but we can't sell him because he's only just signed permanently. To further complicate things, we can only reinvest 75% of the money we make on selling these stars, so we need another summer of world-class wheeler dealing if we're going to improve this squad in these circumstances. Good job, I'm very good at Football Manager, I guess. Ferdi Kadioglu was the first man out of the door, joining West Ham for £42.5 million as soon as the transfer window opened, and we agreed a deal for Karim Konate to join Al Nassr for £54 million shortly afterwards. Mazambo's Champions League exploits clearly caught the eye of Bayern Munich, who gave us £57 million for him, and that ended up being our biggest sale of the summer, setting our maximum incoming transfer at £42.75 million, which isn't really enough to bring in proven Premier League winners. So once again, the rules of the save were forcing me into focusing on bringing in Wonderkids on the cheap. Our first signing of the summer was officially Bradley Barcola for £42 million from PSG, but we actually allocated that fee to last season's spending because it was a guaranteed future fee on a loan. So we can ignore that when we're doing our maths. But of course, being a recent signing means he's going to be a nightmare to get him to leave the club even on loan. So whatever happens this season, he'll be sold at the end of the season, in addition to the top 3 rated players this year. And then the Wonderkids started arriving. And once again, we're limited by the Premier League rule allowing a maximum of 6 foreign under-21 players to be signed from abroad in one season. Otherwise, there would have been loads more. Alisson, a 19-year-old Brazilian under-20 international, joined for £12 million, along with Matteo Berti, a 19-year-old Belgian goalkeeper who already has a full Belgium international cap, for £25 million. Carlo Cirio is a 20-year-old German striker who signed for £11 million, and we paid £18.75 million for 18-year-old Italian defender Andrea Mercato. 20-year-old Mexican international midfielder Giovanni Gomez signed for £7.25 million, and 18-year-old Italian full international defender Alfonso Bianchi joined from Inter for £35.5 million. That's 6 Wonderkids in for just under £110 million. We sold a couple of fringe players while all this was going on, then Al Hilal came in and offered us £52 million for a 32-year-old Karu Mitoma. With the shiny new Italian defenders coming in, we also cashed in on Emir Ortakaya, who'd never come close to getting into our team. That brought our total summer income to £265.75 million, meaning even with our 75% spend limit, we still had the best part of £100 million to spend, even after bringing in all those Wonderkids. But we couldn't bring in any more foreign Wonderkids because of that stupid Premier League rule, and we were already struggling to register everyone in our Premier League and Champions League squads, so we only brought in one more player, Serbian international defensive midfielder Ivan Ilic, coming in for £18.75 million from Bayern Munich. That left us with £71.5 million by our own rules still to spend this transfer window, and even that's nothing compared to the £645 million still in our official transfer budget. It seems that 5 seasons of running a club at a consistent transfer profit whilst winning the Champions League is quite good for business. Who knew? Despite winning the Champions League, though, the media still had no confidence in us and predicted we'd finished 7th in the Premier League this season, and the board were just as unambitious, just hoping for a Europa League qualification and a domestic cup. In fact, they seemed more interested in developing the best youth system in the world than they were in actually winning major trophies. They really like money. We had a solid start to the season in the Premier League, beating Southampton and rivals Crystal Palace and drawing with bogey club West Ham and Arsenal, and we also picked up another trophy, beating Liverpool to win the European Super Cup. But then our Champions League campaign began and we had a little bit of a wobble, which is not ideal when you're the defending champions. We drew away at Real Sociedad before losing against Liverpool and Milan, not winning until match day 4 when we got a 5-0 win over Slavia Prague. This iffy form carried over into the Premier League as well, with us losing to Spurs, Man United and Nottingham Forest. We dropped more points in the Champions League against Bayern and lost in the league to Leeds and West Ham. of course, and also got dumped out of the EFL Cup in the quarterfinal by Newcastle, and by the time the January transfer window came around, we were down in 17th place in the Champions League and 5th place in the Premier League, 9 points behind leaders Arsenal. With us already knowing top scorer and star man Barcola would be leaving at the end of the year, along with our 3 other best performers, it was starting to look like winning the Premier League would never be possible if we could never get any momentum together with a group of players. But on the bright side, we did have that £70 million left over from the summer to spend, so I went out and got a big meaty boy to cheer, with Jean-Claire Todibo joining for £31.5 million from Milan. Form picked up in January as well, including a 6-match winning run that included 2 Champions League victories and an away win at top of the table Arsenal in the league, although that run did abruptly come to an end with a 2-1 defeat away against Man City at the end of the month. We ended up finishing 13th in the Champions League, so we'd have to play in the additional playoff for the first time, and despite all the league heroics, we were still 9 points off top spot and down to 6th place, effectively out of the title race for this season. But maybe we could win the Champions League again. Or at least hopefully qualify for it. The playoff drew us against Celtic, who we beat comfortably over 2 legs, including a Bradley Barcola hat-trick in the second leg. We are seriously going to miss that boy next season. And the round of 16 put us against Manchester City, who were actually below us in the Premier League, having their worst season in 20 years under new manager Vincent Kompany. So we had hope. A frustrating home leg saw us dominate the match, but only come away with a 1-1 draw, handing City the advantage for the away fixture, in which they comfortably beat us 2-0, and we never looked like competing, and the defeat hit us hard, sparking a 4-match losing streak that also saw us dumped out of the FA Cup by Man United and losing to Spurs and rivals Crystal Palace in the league. It was our lowest point for years and left us down in 7th place in the Premier League, genuinely concerned that we might not qualify for Europe at all, which would then reset our qualify for Europe 5 years in a row objective and mean that despite feeling so close to the finish line, we'd actually only be about halfway through the challenge. Thankfully, that fear was enough to spark some life back into us, and we only lost 1 more game for the rest of the season. Although, to be fair, it was a pretty easy run-in, and we probably still dropped more points than we should have. We ended up finishing 5th in the league, which may or may not be enough to get us into the Champions League again, but it was at least enough to get us in Europe of some kind, meaning the 5 years in a row objective was now officially complete, and all we had to do was win the Premier League and we were done. Which is easier said than done when you realise we finished 22 points behind champion Spurs and would now have to sell star man Barcola, who finished with our highest average rating because he's great, plus the next 3 best players, which were long-serving Mats Wiefer, who'd been here since the start of the save, Franco Mastantuono, who got a 7.08 from 18 games and actually probably won't be missed that much, only playing 18 games, and Dijon Camry, who did a 7.04 from 48 games, which was actually the worst of his 3 seasons at the club for him personally, but is a sign that this season as a whole the team just underperformed and we'd probably relied a bit too much on Barcola. The problem is, of course, that after a poor season with no massive stars to sell other than Barcola, incoming transfer fees were lower, which then has a knock-on effect of how much we can spend. In fact, Barcola was a nightmare all summer, rejecting permanent moves to Man City, Newcastle and Milan before eventually agreeing to join Manchester City on loan right at the end of the window for a £375,000 loan fee and only with an optional future fee. So he basically generated us nothing. We got £36.5 million for Wiefer from Milan, but just £7.5 million for Mastantuono from Valencia, and Camry went to Al Hilal for £33.5 million. I also decided it was time to move on some of our older players while we could still generate some transfer fees for them, with Ivan Toney going back to Saudi Arabia for £10 million and Kieran Tierney joining him for £29.5 million. We also managed to get £45 million from Al Hilal for Wouter Ghosts, which ended up being our highest sale of the summer for a rotation player, no less. And that set our maximum incoming transfer fee at just £33.75 million, and we were going to have to focus on Wonderkids again. Our total sales for the summer were £165 million in the end, so we had £123.75 million to spend, but in the last couple of summers, that's roughly what we spent just on the Wonderkids, so we really weren't going to be getting much else besides them this summer. Unless, of course, we tried to repeat our Ruben Neves success from a few years ago and had a look at bringing in some free transfers. A 33-year-old Dominic Calvert-Lewin was the first to arrive, having been released by Manchester United largely due to some guy called Evan Ferguson who was doing quite well there. I have previous with Calvert-Lewin in other saves, and even as an old man, he should be a good enough one-season replacement for Tony. He was then joined by fellow 33-year-old James Maddison, who'd been released by Spurs after barely featuring for the past couple of seasons, and we finally had some proven winners at the club with 3 Premier Leagues, a Champions League, a Europa League, and a Conference League between them. We then went back to the Wonderkid plan, with 18-year-old Colombian international midfielder Felipe Arias coming in for just $2.5 million. We also signed 21-year-old French defender Kingsley Edom for $18 million and 18-year-old English Wonderkid striker James Edwards from Everton for $20.5 million. We signed another 18-year-old English striker Patrick Southam from Middlesbrough for $8.25 million, and then got back to basics by adding a couple of young Brazilians, midfielder William for $17.5 million and left-back Thiago for $14.5 million. We got another English youngster in winger Joel Davies from Blackburn for $16.75 million, and then finished our summer off with Bissau-Ghanaian winger Ismail Costa for $25 million, maxing out our spend at £123 million and saving absolutely nothing for the January window. Unless you count the £791 million the board insist I can spend, which we don't. For goodness me, do I want to? We drew our opening game with Norwich, then lost to Chelsea and Leeds, and were down in 17th place as the summer window closed, and I sensed that for the first time, the board might be starting to get a little frustrated at my refusal to spend money with the club seemingly in freefall. We finally abandoned the 4-2-3-1 that we'd been using for a number of seasons and switched to a 4-2-4, which allowed me to play young Spanish international striker Jose Vicente Hernandez alongside Calvert-Lewin after he'd spent the last couple of years as a bench warmer. We'd lost so many attacking midfielders over the last few seasons, with the likes of Cameri, Mazambo and Enciso never being properly replaced, so the tactical shift made sense, and we immediately won our first game of the season against Wolves. But then got spanked 4-0 by Real Madrid in our Champions League opener, lost again in the league to Newcastle, and then again in Europe to Milan. Things really weren't looking very good, until our new look front four clicked for the first time at the end of September, beating Arsenal 1-0 with Hernandez scoring the only goal of the game. This sparked a run of form that saw us lose only once more before Christmas, a frustrating 2-1 defeat against Cardiff that I'm blaming on a Champions League hangover. But we drew with Manchester City, Liverpool and Tottenham in a run of really hard games, then beat Man United, Luton, Brentford, West Ham and Crystal Palace as the fixtures got a little easier. Our bad start still left us well off the pace as the January transfer window opened, down in 8th place, 10 points behind leaders Man United, but knowing that on our day we were better than them as we'd shown the last time we played. Our Champions League form was still pretty rough. We were just clinging on to a qualification spot down in 22nd place, but we weren't really bothered about that. We were focused on our only remaining objective, the Premier League. Which is why it wasn't ideal when Real Madrid came knocking for our goalkeeper Guillem Restes with a £125 million offer, smashing our record transfer, which was Enciso from a few years before. Restes wanted to go, and we didn't want to keep an unhappy player at the club, so we let him leave and had to put our faith in our young Belgian international Matteo Berti, who we'd spent £25 million on 18 months before but never really used. He was starting for Belgium though, so it shouldn't be too much of a disaster. Hopefully. That massive fee, along with the £23 million we got from West Ham for Miles Lewis-Skelly, who'd never really established himself with us and spent last season on loan to Dortmund's bench, meant we now had an unexpected £112 million to spend in January. We started off sensibly, bringing in a new backup keeper, 20-year-old Colombian international Elasio Castillo for £2.8 million, then spent £22.5 million on 5-time Premier League winner Gabriel Jesus from Arsenal. Thiago Almada came in on loan from Manchester United. We have learned nothing from what happened with Barcola. And Andreas Schelderup signed for £51 million from Porto. Our final deal was £13.75 million for Swiss international left-back Alan Paradzik. And we finally had a front four that was arguably an upgrade on the last couple of seasons, albeit with a hopefully temporary downgrade in goal. Our good form continued into January, with our only defeat coming in the EFL Cup semi-final first leg against Man City, a loss we overturned in the second leg to book a spot in the final. We qualified for the Champions League knockouts comfortably in the end with a 15th place finish and went undefeated in the Premier League, sitting in 6th place, 9 points off the top as the transfer window closed. We then lost yet another EFL Cup final, this time to Spurs, but progressed in the Champions League and FA Cup and scored some big Premier League wins against Newcastle, Arsenal, Spurs and Manchester United. We broke Liverpool's spirits by knocking them out of the FA Cup, then out of the Champions League in the round of 16, and then did the same to Manchester United, playing them 3 times in 4 matches, beating them 1-0 in the league, and then knocking them out of the Champions League over 2 legs in the quarter-final. They never really recovered from the morale damage and started dropping points all over the place, leaving the door open in the Premier League. And we kept winning, getting that lovely run of easy Premier League matches that we'd benefited from before Christmas at just the right time. Barcelona proved a little too much for us in the Champions League semi-final, beating us 5-4 in aggregate, but by this point we were top of the Premier League and fighting it out in one of the closest title races for years with Arsenal, Man United, Man City and Newcastle. We did drop some points in a crucial away game at Liverpool, with that ending 0-0, but we then smashed Man City in the FA Cup final 6-1, which was weirdly played with 2 league games of the season still to play, but that gave us the confidence to beat our biggest bogey team of the save, West Ham, 2-0 in the penultimate match to win the league and with it complete the final objective of the challenge. A final day draw against Villa didn't matter because we'd done it. We had won the Premier League with a points total of just 79, the lowest league winning points total of the entire save, but it didn't matter. We'd done it. Objective complete. And in the process, we'd accumulated an available transfer budget of £989 million for whoever takes over from me to rebuild the squad with. If my successor followed these rules, he'd now have to sell Jesus, Bertie and youngster Patrick Southam, showing just how pivotal that big Restes transfer was in January. It allowed not only a better keeper to emerge in Bertie, but also gave us the money to bring in Jesus, who was exactly the extra bit of quality we needed in an attack. But that's it, folks. Challenge completed after 7 seasons. We met our objectives, winning the Premier League and the Champions League, plus we qualified for Europe in 6 consecutive seasons in the end. We also lost 3 Carabao Cup finals, won the Europa League, 2 FA Cups, the Community Shield and 2 European Super Cups. We upgraded our youth facilities once and our training facilities twice. We expanded the stadium, made a £600 million transfer profit and established our youth setup as the best in the world with 0 debt. Who says I can only play Football Manager one way? But now the challenge is handed over to you. You know the rules. We made them very clear back at the start of the save. So let me know how you get on. That's what the comments section down below is for. And remember, we'll know if you're fibbing. And of course, if you've enjoyed this challenge, please leave a nice big thumbs up on the video for us to let us know you want to see more stuff like this. Subscribe to the channel for daily Football Manager videos. And thank you very much for watching.